Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Isabel Schmedemann, and I am one of the instructors here in the gerontology program at K-State. And not this current semester, but last semester, I developed a course on working with aging veterans. And so I just want to kind of do a snippet for you of that course content. And I've got a few slides prepared. I'm sure that most of you have worked with veterans in your career. So I'm not here to profess that I have all the answers, but just maybe some food for thought that will get a conversation started on how to work with veterans. I'll say just to start out with, I'm talking mostly about the veterans, but I don't want to not bring up the spouses of these veterans and or even children of veterans, because when someone serves in the military, the entire family is affected. And so, Madison, if you want to go to the next slide.
Okay. Maybe. There we go.
There we go. So the learning objectives today are, they're in front of you. I won't read them out loud. I'll just let you peruse for a second. I think one of the things that I had students comment on at the end of the semester when I taught this was their appreciation for learning more about veterans and sort of the triggers and how to have conversations with them. So again, not professing to be an expert on that, but having had experience in my professional career working with veterans, advocating for veterans, I think I've got a little bit to offer. So you can go ahead to the next slide, Madison. So I'm going to kind of focus on 3 past wars or conflicts. So of course, the one that we probably talk about more than any is World War II. It was a very big initiative. And I guess fortunately or unfortunately, most of the veterans of that era are now past. There may be still a few stragglers that are getting close to their late 90s, early 100s. And so you may still have someone who served in World War II, but they're becoming fewer and fewer very quickly. The thing that was unique about World War II versus Korea and Vietnam was that they came back heroes. Although they all suffered the same traumas of war, both physical and mental traumas, there's something to be said for ticker tape parades and coming back as the victors of a war. And certainly the World War II veterans were that. But most of them started out very humbly. You know, they were hometown kids, a lot of them just graduating or even in their senior year of high school. And they were called to serve. They felt the need to serve and are very proud of that service. I think the challenge that generation of veterans faced was that the VA was a difficult system to navigate and was overwhelming. And the speed with which communication happened, because it was a snail mail type of an environment, was what they relied on, and a lot of them came from rural areas where mail service was a little better than Pony Express, I'm imagining, but it was a slower process. And so getting approval for requests for health benefits, disability requests, those types of things just took longer. And I think were very cumbersome because it wasn't a streamlined system. You can go ahead, Madison, with the next slide. So then we go to the Korean War, and I'll just throw in the Vietnam conflict with that because they really were one right after the other. And Korean War veterans were kind of a forgotten group. The war lasted about 3 years, and then Vietnam just followed right on the heels of that, and there wasn't the pomp and circumstance, there weren't the parades, there wasn't the recognition. It was a very tumultuous time in our country. A lot of people didn't think we should be in Korea, they didn't think we should be in Vietnam, and then the Vietnam War drug on for like 20 years. So Korean veterans were sort of a forgotten group. The other thing for both Vietnam veterans and Korean veterans is that things like drug abuse, alcoholism, PTSD, mental health issues just in general were not, they weren't seen as illness, they were seen as a social problem. And so for them to get disability benefits because they were struggling mentally was much tougher and really kind of obsolete at the time. Now, since then, we've learned a lot, we've improved that a lot. And so I think for that group of veterans, things have gotten better as they've gotten older. But I can remember several years ago, early in my career, my nursing career, taking care of a couple of Vietnam veterans that were very paranoid. They isolated themselves in their rooms, just were very unapproachable, and a lot of it was just fear, and it was easier to isolate themselves. I had one that ran away. We weren't a locked facility, it was a long-term care facility, and we weren't didn't have a locked unit, didn't feel like we needed to, but there was a particular night, a lot of thunderstorms and lightning in the area, and this veteran eloped out the door, and we had massed helicopters and everything out because we were out in the middle of rural Kansas looking for this gentleman who was doing everything he could to elude being found, not because he was afraid of us, but because of the PTSD that he was struggling with. So I think we didn't know enough about it at the time. And so that's why I think it's important to talk about it even now. Most of our Korean and Vietnam veterans are in their 70s and 80s, and so they're going to be seeking that care if they haven't already. So the VA has come a long way. Madison, you can switch there we go. But so there are some similarities. Oh, and I threw the Middle East into this because that's the up and coming generation of veterans that will be coming to our arena of elder care in probably the next 15 to 20 years, but I won't see it, but most certainly many of you will. I think the things that are important to remember is that the men and women who join the military and who still join the military are doing it out of a compelling need and desire to serve our country. There's honor in that service, and they go in with that spirit. I think minorities and women especially, and they should be included in the minorities, but I pull them out because not only did they incur unequal treatment, but they incurred sexual harassment and rape, a lot of things that men would not endure. And still, they all had a sense of honor, and that includes the minorities and women, and maybe even more so because they endured what I'll call friendly fire, along with the things in battle. I think all who saw combat or were on the front lines or in the medical units experiencing the trauma of combat, whether it be taking care of injured soldiers or going to the front to rescue, they experienced a lack of supplies, ammunition, food. There's a book, at the end, there's some references that I share with you. And there are stories, there's a story written by a Marine recalling his time in the Marines during Vietnam. And he talks about how they didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough ammunition, sometimes they didn't have enough artillery guns, and yet they were expected to win a war. In Vietnam, there was probably a lot more, but only because I think it's been documented more, a lot more substance abuse. Marijuana was a big thing, and but then they were also exposed to chemicals. Agent Orange is one that's very familiar, but there are so many others. And this is one of the things that, as the Middle East veterans come of age, that we're going to see effects from those chemicals as well. We saw a bunch early on. I did OB for about 20 years, and during that time was Desert Storm. And we joked at the time that when the soldiers returned, we experienced Desert Stork. But we had babies born because of the chemical exposures of their dads and their moms, with birth defects that were just not conducive with life. And so there's just a lot of things along with that. And with that, for the soldiers comes the guilt that their child suffered or died. So Madison, next slide, please. So there's a lot of service-related issues and outcomes that they face. And one of the most common, and I put it at the top of the list, is the loss of hearing. A lot of times when they were in battle, they didn't have even earplugs to protect their ears. And so a lot of our service veterans have come back with extreme hearing loss or varied hearing loss. And back when they first returned, they probably had that hearing loss. But because it was a very small part of what the VA system considered a disability, they might have gotten a 10% disability or whatever. So even though it affected their life in a much broader manner. So you've got the loss of vision, loss of limbs. I think there were servicemen during World War II that lost limbs, that had significant trauma from explosions, mines, all of those things, but many of them died because medicine just wasn't as advanced as it was by the time Korea and Vietnam hit, and most certainly now we're seeing many more survivors of head traumas and things in these later wars because of medical advancements. And I'm not for sure that that's done anybody any favors, because they live with significant injury and disability, and families struggle because they want to be involved and they want to be there for their veteran, but it's extremely difficult. So I think, as I've gotten older, I know, and probably for many, you just have general aches and pains, but for veterans, they have been experiencing that generalized pain probably much longer. And whether they didn't attribute it to their service or whether they did, the system just was not as supportive of chronic pain issues early on as they are now. Depression and mental health challenges, that's huge, and addiction and alcoholism. And again, they saw that as a social problem, not a medical problem. And now we're dealing with it as a medical problem, which is the right thing. So I read an article while I was preparing for the class that I taught that said that of the Vietnam veterans surviving, there's only 30% of those veterans that are still surviving. There was probably the highest suicide rate, death by overdose, alcoholism, just all of those chronic things. And then illnesses like diabetes, heart disease, because of the exposure to Agent Orange. And so only 30% of those veterans still survive, which I was astounded by. I had not really, I thought it would be higher. So next slide, please, Madison. So challenges are that many of the veterans, I'm talking about over the course of the last several years that I experienced in my nursing practice, was that they lived in the shadows for years. They didn't pursue benefits because when they first got out of the military and became a veteran, they may not have had the significant symptoms, and so they didn't pursue, or they were turned down for disability benefits because it wasn't to an extent that elevated to an extent of being covered. So then they go live their life, some of them very successfully, others struggled, but accepting what was put in front of them. So then they get to be older veterans and they need services, and they don't either, one, think that they're eligible for those services, or they don't know how to get them. And all of a sudden we're in a technologically advanced world, and we didn't sit with computers on our lap in grade school and in junior high. And so it's a foreign environment for a lot of our aged veterans now. The other thing with Korean and Vietnam veterans is that they still carry a lot of fear and guilt, because when they returned from the war, they were treated as second-rate citizens, either because they had served it. No one thought that the Vietnam conflict was oh, that we should have been there. And Korea was the same thing. And so instead of putting that anger where it should have been with our government, they took it out on the veterans, the returning servicemen and women. And so they still live with that persona that they're not accepted. And that's just sad. So I think over the last few years, we've done a lot better at recognizing the value of our veterans and praising them and doing things to remember their service. But that's been slow over the course of years. Madison, next slide, please. So there are several agencies. These are three that I think are noteworthy. Anyone can go to va.gov, and there's a plethora of information on that website for veterans, for families of veterans, and then for healthcare providers. I found it very useful. I was a chief operating officer in a little hospital up in Maine several years back, and I had a veteran that came to us through our emergency room, and it took a little bit for us to figure out he was actually a veteran. He was very traumatized and had been living off the grid for years. And when we started to sort of peel the onion, I was like, gosh, what are we going to do? We've got to get him benefits. And I ended up calling the state senators in Maine for help with that. But the va.gov is a great resource and kind of leads you in that direction. Every state or territory has a Veterans Affairs office. And in Kansas, it's Kansas Commission of Veteran Affairs, and it's located in Topeka. There's a hotline number. You can get online and do it on the computer. And then every state or territory has a regional benefits office, and the Kansas office is in Wichita, which is weird that they're not both in one location, but that's because it's affiliated with Dole VA, Bob Dole VA hospital down in Wichita is why there's that split. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of support groups for veterans. A lot of these you're going to be familiar with, but I thought I'd at least put them out there. American Legion, it's been in existence the longest. The American Vets, which is, all of these have been in existence for a long time, but I think most recently more publicized than before. I think the newest one, oh, I found a typo, is the Wounded Warriors Project. And that has really been very helpful for the latest group of veterans out of the Middle East. And I think they have been best at helping take care of their own, but it has been expanded. Next slide, Madison. So the best resource that I found while I was doing my research was Veterans Benefits for You. It's by Paul R. Lawrence. And he's the former Undersecretary for Benefits for the U.S. Department of Veterans. And it's the latest version of the VA benefits. And so it takes you through chapter by chapter everything that you would ever want to know about veterans, who's qualified, how they qualify, who to contact. So if there's one book you keep in your facility, in your organization for veterans to help navigate, this would be my recommendation. So anyway, then the next slide is going to have just a few interesting reading type things. And we're going to share these slides with you, so you don't need to worry about writing them down. What I'd like to do now is just bring up the group, and I'd like for you all to take yourselves off of no video. I'd like to see faces, because I'd like to have just a short discussion and see if we can have a conversation. I have some questions prepared for your group, so if you answer or respond, please take yourself off of mute so that we can hear you. Okay, so I'm still experiencing a couple of you with no video, and that may be just because you're out in a rural area and can't get video. So there we go.
Hello.
Hi. So one of the questions that I'd like to just start out with to start the conversation is, how many of you in your facilities have veterans or veterans' wives as residents?
This is Prairie Mission. We have a veterans, and we have veteran wives here at Prairie Mission.
Great. So help me with Prairie Mission. Where is that?
It's in St. Paul, Kansas.
So is that Western Kansas?
It's southeast Kansas. It's a rural
Okay.
area.
Okay. That was one I wasn't familiar with. What about some of the others on the call? Nobody has veterans in your homes?
I'm Darna from Westview Manor in Peabody, and we're mental health. So we have age ranges from 25 to 74, but we don't have any veterans.
Okay, so I'm familiar with Peabody, and it's been several years ago, but we had a patient in the hospital that was struggling with mental health and suicidal ideations, and then other mental health issues. And we actually placed that resident in Peabody for a short time, because it was, beds are just scarce. And we found out, or we discovered sort of after the fact, that he was a veteran. And so sometimes you don't know, because by the time they get to the long-term care, they're confused, they're disoriented, they may not be able to speak for themselves. And so, but that's good. I didn't realize that Peabody had gone completely mental health. That's great.
Yes. Now, health and rehab, there are 2 facilities in Peabody. The other one is long-term care. It's a skilled facility, but
Right.
We are a level 2 mental health, and our goal is to get them back out into the community in some form, whether it's group home, shared living. They need to start somewhere like that before they go out by themselves or go back to where they were previously.
Yeah, that's great. I actually live in Harrington, so
Okay.
we're kind of neighbors. So Stephanie Wheatley from, I'm not for sure where.
I'm actually from Westview, and actually this is the previous person's name. My name is Loretta.
Hi.
So I'm also from Westview.
Oh, okay, great.
And our average age here is in the mid-40s, so.
So do you have you seen folks who might have served in the Middle East?
I have seen
No,
at
I
previous
don't think
jobs,
we
but
have
not
here. Mm-mm.
I'm sorry, what?
No.
No? Okay. I just wondered, because they'd be in their 40s, 50s, that kind of age range. And maybe it's because the VA system has beefed up their mental health support. So that may be that's probably a good thing, so.
Yeah.
Cool. I should know where Sheridan County is. I just see that on the. Is there anybody there from Sheridan County on the? All right, well, we'll just pass that by. So, so one of the things that I'm curious about, or I'd like to have a little bit of discussion on is things that you are doing. Hi, Sabrina. Do you have veterans in your home or veterans wives? Okay, good. So are there special events that you do in your homes that recognize, honor vets and veterans' families? I'm just curious what I know the local home in my community, they do something for Veterans Day, and then they get on Facebook and talk about fireworks on the 4th of July and just recognize that, as we're blasting those in the community and stuff. So what things do you all do or not do?
Prairie Mission, what we do is our school has a big veterans program, and we take the veterans over to the school and they get recognized along with other community members. It's a nice service, and then they go for lunch. But last year we had a resident who is 102 who he had a standing applause from everybody because of his
Oh,
service
wow.
and everything, and he's still living today. We also have a veteran wall on our facility, and it lists the names of those veterans, and also the spouses, the wives, their husbands are listed on this wall, and our employees. I forgot to mention we do recognize our employees that are veterans as well. So
That's awesome. That is so cool. And thank you for bringing up employees, because they can be your greatest asset when you're, because there's a camaraderie that happens with veterans. That's how the VA or the American Legion and the VFW, how they got formed, because veterans felt a need to mingle and to be with other veterans. So that is so awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
we also have a parade coming up this month, and our veterans march in that parade if they're able. If not, then we have them on golf carts.
Uh-huh.
And they start, they lead the parade. So
That is so cool. Yeah, because D-Day is June 6th. That's coming up? Gosh, very fast. So,
and many of them still attend, the American Legion meetings if they're capable or still members. So
that I'm glad, because that was going to be my next question is, do you have community groups like the VFW and the American Legion, and do your residents participate?
yes, and if they can't, then sometimes the veterans or their peers will come here and meet with them and have coffee and still have that fellowship from this fellow service gentleman. So
That's awesome. Sheridan County, do you have events coming up? I know she has to type it in, so I'll give her a second. So as you have veterans admitted, or veterans' wives admitted, but specifically veterans admitted to your homes, I guess I'll just ask, does anyone have a story of something that really touched you from the veterans as they've been admitted. I have 2 or 3 that I think about even today, that when I was a young nurse and was the director of nursing in a local nursing home, and we had several veterans, and some chilling stories and then some very heartwarming stories. So anything you feel like you want to share? I think the 102-year-old is a great story, and I think I remember seeing him recognized somewhere, but I may have him confused with somebody else, but that's really cool. Nothing? All right. Well, oh, husband and wife admitted. Wife, the Holocaust survivor, husband served in the Army during the war. Wow. That's amazing. We don't really think about, but a lot of our servicemen married women from the war-torn country that we were at. So I know my mom was German, and there were a lot of her friends and classmates that came to the United States because they were involved with servicemen and then came to the United States. So, wow. All right. Well, like I said, we'll share this PowerPoint with you. There's no secret anythings. I loved, so the books that are on the back page, the last page of that, are veteran stories. There's one that's our Vietnam Wars, and it's 100 servicemen who told their story. And the thing that impressed me about that book was that despite the horrors that they saw, their stories were very strong, or really were evidence of their strength and how they tried to see the world from an optimistic point of view. They didn't wallow in pity. And I found those very inspiring. And then there's the Soup for the Veteran's Soul, which has a lot of really profound stories that have been shared. And then the one by the Marine, he started out as a kind of a high school dropout almost. I mean, I think he got his diploma, but he fled his community to become a Marine, and ended up at the end of his story, he was an attorney. He came back from the war and went back to school and got his law degree. And I thought, wow. So anyway, I appreciate your time today. I hope you've found something that you can take away from this. And I appreciate your attention, but I am going to let you go back to work. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. If you haven't put your name and home name in the chat, that'd be great if you could do that for attendance purposes. Have a great day.